At night, she dreamed of gold, not as treasure, but as light flooding through corridors, pouring out of wounds, dissolving faces into radiance. Sometimes she woke gasping, hands clenched as if she'd been trying to hold onto something slipping away. The ocean always looked back at her, always still, always waiting. She had begun to think she might be the only soul left here until the morning she found the footprints. They trailed across the wet sand near the lower ridge, long, measured, deliberate. Too large to be hers, too fresh to be old. They led from the far rocks toward the remains of the east terrace, stopping near what was once the lobby's entrance. She followed them slowly, her pulse rising. And there, sitting where the fountain used to be, was Ronan Vex, alive. He looked different now, gaunt, his skin pale from exposure, his hair matted by salt. A long gash cut across his temple, half healed and crusted with sand. But his eyes were the same gray, focused, steady, as if the storm had only sharpened him. Elena froze, her throat dry. "You're supposed to be dead." He smiled faintly. "I could say the same about you." She stepped closer, searching his face for proof of what she was seeing. "I saw you. You were trapped." "I was," he said simply. "The explosion freed me before it buried the rest. The sea let me go. The sea doesn't let anyone go." He tilted his head, studying her. Maybe it made an exception. The way he said it made her stomach turn, not because of arrogance, but because of truth. There was something different in him now, something deeper. She took another step forward, wary. "What do you want?" Ronan looked past her toward the horizon. "To talk." "About what?" "The thing we both survived." She crossed her arms, her voice sharp. "I sealed it. It's over." He gave a slow, deliberate shake of his head. "No, you buried it. That's not the same thing." The fire between them crackled, spitting embers into the wind. Elena exhaled slowly. "If you're here to threaten me, save your breath. I have nothing left for you to take." Ronan looked at her, not cruelly, not even coldly, but with a calm that felt heavier than rage. "I'm not here to take. I'm here to offer you something." "An offer," she repeated. "From who?" "From the people I work for," he said. "The same people who built the first vault after Solara died. The same ones who've been watching the coast since you woke it." Her heart pounded. They know, they always knew. They were waiting for confirmation that it still existed. And now he looked at her, his expression unreadable. Now they want to retrieve it. Elena laughed, hollow and incredulous. "Retrieve it? It's gone, Ronan. The vault's collapsed. The gold is under 100 tons of water and rock. Gold can be recovered," he said softly. "That's why it was made. What can't be recovered." He paused. "Is what it touched." She frowned. "What are you talking about?" Ronan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small vial glass, sealed with wax, filled with a fine golden dust that shimmered faintly even in the dull morning light. Her breath caught. "You brought that up," she whispered. He rolled the vial between his fingers. "It followed me, or maybe it saved me. I don't know anymore." Elena stepped back, horror flashing across her face. "You shouldn't have it. You don't understand what it does." "I understand perfectly," he said. "It wants a vessel. It always has. Solara tried to cage it in gold because he thought he could own light. But light doesn't belong to anyone. It finds its way out. Always." He set the vial gently on the stone beside the fire. "That's why my employers want to study it. Contain it properly this time. Learn what it really is." Elena shook her head violently. "No, no, you can't. It's not a thing to study. It's alive. It's hunger. It devours whatever touches it." Ronan smiled faintly, that same maddening calm. "Then maybe it's time we learned what it's hungry for." She stared at him, speechless. The firelight reflected in his eyes, and for a fleeting second she saw it again, a flicker of gold beneath the gray, like sunlight under ice. Her voice trembled. "It's already in you, isn't it?" He didn't deny it. "Maybe, he said softly, "but I'm still here, still human enough to finish what Solara started." Elena took another step back. "You think you can control it?" He smiled faintly. "No, but I can guide it." The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain. The ocean beyond them was still, but its surface rippled faintly, not from breeze, but from something below. She turned toward the horizon, dread rising in her chest. The tide was coming in faster than it should. Ronan stood, brushing sand from his coat. "You sealed the door," he said quietly. "But it still heard you. That means you're connected, you and I both. That's why I came back. I can't do this without you." Elena shook her head. "You're insane." He stepped closer, his voice low. "You can't run from it, Elena. It's in you. You felt it too, the warmth that never leaves, the hum that doesn't fade. You think you survived because you fought it, but it let you live because it knows you'll come back." She stared at him, her heart pounding. "Why would I ever go back?" He leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. "Because the sea hasn't finished with you." For a long moment, neither moved. The fire crackled between them, casting long shadows across the broken stone. The sound of waves grew louder, steady, rhythmic, deliberate. Ronan turned toward the water. "There's a ship coming at dawn," he said quietly. "A research vessel. My employers are sending it to begin extraction. You can either help us or watch them do it without you." He picked up the vial, its light flickering across his palm, and began walking toward the cliffs. "Ronan," she shouted. He didn't turn around. When the wind finally swallowed his silhouette, only the ocean answered, whispering softly against the rocks, its rhythm almost human. Elena stood alone beside the dying fire, staring at the horizon until the first traces of dawn began to rise. Somewhere beyond that calm surface, the gold slept again, dreaming. But as the light touched the waves, she felt it, a faint pulse in her chest, perfectly in sync with the tide. The sea was breathing again, and its next breath would decide which of them still belonged to the surface. The dawn that followed was cold and colorless, a thin wash of gray spilling across a sea that no longer looked alive but watchful. The air hung thick with salt and the faint, metallic scent of aftermath. Every surface still shimmered with a dusting of gold too fine to collect, too real to ignore. It coated her hands, her clothes, her breath, a reminder that the sea's silence was never empty. Elena Marlowe hadn't moved all night. She'd sat by the dying fire, watching the horizon where Ronan had vanished. The memory of his words clung to her like the salt on her skin. "It's not over. You and I, we're connected." The tide whispered that he was right. By the time the sun rose, the research vessel had appeared, a black silhouette against the pallid morning sky. It moved with mechanical grace, engines humming low, cutting through the waves like a blade. Elena stood, every muscle in her body stiff with dread. She should have left. She should have packed what little she had left and walked inland until she could no longer smell the sea. But she couldn't. The pull was still there, deep in her chest, like an undertow under her ribs. The thought of leaving it behind felt like severing a limb. So she waited. Hours later, the boat anchored near the ruins. From its deck, small drones lifted into the air, their blades slicing through the stillness. They swept across the cliffs, scanning the wreckage, their red lights flashing like restless eyes. A voice called out from below, male, confident, unfamiliar. "Dr. Marlowe," she turned sharply. A group of people stood near the rocks, 3 men and a woman, dressed in expedition gear, carrying clipboards and digital sensors. And among them, leading the way, was Ronan. He looked clean again. Rested, composed. Whatever had haunted him the night before had been buried beneath that smooth, professional facade. "Elena," he said, stepping forward, "I told you they'd come." She stared at him, incredulous. "You didn't waste time." He ignored the bite in her tone. We're setting up a temporary base along the southern ridge. I told them you'd want to consult. Consult? She laughed bitterly. I nearly drowned sealing that chamber, and now you want me to help dig it up again. Ronan's gaze softened, but his words were precise. You're the only person who knows how it responds. You've seen it awake, you've touched it. If we're to contain it, we need that knowledge. Contain? She echoed. You mean control? He didn't deny it. One of the men, older, sharp-eyed, stepped forward. Dr. Marlowe, my name is Halden. I represent the Arcadian Foundation. We've been monitoring anomalies across the Atlantic shelf for years. Your discovery confirms our suspicions that the Solara construct still exists. We're here to stabilize it, not exploit it. Elena's laugh was hollow. You mean to keep it under your lock this time, like Solara did? Halden's tone hardened. Solara was reckless. We're scientists. Scientists, she murmured. That's what every grave robber calls themselves before the curse hits. Ronan stepped between them. Elena, listen to me. You've seen what it can do, what it is. If we don't understand it, someone else will find it, and they won't care who gets hurt. Her eyes met his, searching for the man she thought had once understood her, the diver, the seeker, the one who'd faced the impossible with her beneath the waves. But now all she saw was conviction, hard and cold as the sea he served. You said it let you live, she said quietly. Maybe it did because it wanted you to bring it company. The words struck him. For a moment, his expression faltered, a flash of something human, guilt or doubt. But then the facade returned. This isn't about belief, Elena. It's about balance. What's down there isn't evil. It's energy, pure, incorruptible. It can be studied, replicated, used, she said sharply. Ronan didn't answer. The wind picked up, whistling through the broken pillars of the old terrace. The sound almost drowned out the low, rhythmic thrum beneath the earth, so faint she thought it might be her imagination. But Halden heard it too. His gaze flicked toward the water. We'll need a reading before we proceed, he said. Two of the others began unloading equipment, sensors, sonar panels, magnetic readers. Their machines clicked and whirred, sending soft pulses into the depths. Elena turned away, nausea rising in her throat. You're making a mistake. Halden didn't look up. Discovery always starts that way. She clenched her fists. You can't measure what you don't understand. You think the ocean wants to give this back to you? He smiled faintly. The ocean doesn't want anything. It's nature. It just is. But Elena knew better. The ocean wanted everything. Her heart raced as she watched them lower a drone into the water. Its lights flickered as it descended through the churning gray. She could almost see it, the camera's beam slicing into the ruins below, brushing against the edges of the sealed vault. And then a flash. The monitors on deck lit up in unison, gold bleeding through the static. The hum returned, soft at first, then building the unmistakable resonance of the Solara chamber awakening again. Signal lock acquired. One of the crew said, metallic readings confirmed. It's responding to the sonar. Elena stepped forward, eyes wide. Turn it off, Halden frowned. Why, it's not metal. It's alive, she shouted, voice cracking. It hears you, but it was too late. The hum deepened, shaking through the cliffside like thunder underwater. The drone's signal spiked, its feed blurring into gold before cutting to black. The sonar panels began to vibrate violently, lights flashing red. Power surge. Someone yelled. Ronan grabbed a nearby control unit, slamming switches down. Shut it off. The machines went dark one by one, the air thick with tension and the smell of ozone. Silence fell again, too quickly, too perfectly. And then, from somewhere beneath the water, came a sound, a deep, slow knock. 1, 2, 3, the sea itself answering. Elena's blood ran cold. It's awake. No one moved. The waves lapped at the rocks, gentle as breath. The knock came again, faint, deliberate, as though something vast and patient was testing the walls of its cage. Ronan's voice was quiet now. It knows we're here. Elena turned to him, fear breaking through her anger. You have to stop this. You can't control it. It doesn't want to be studied, it wants to spread. Ronan looked down, his face unreadable. Then maybe that's what it was always meant to do. She took a step toward him, whispering, "You sound just like Solara." His eyes lifted to hers. Maybe he wasn't wrong. The air between them trembled. A fine mist rose from the sea, glowing faintly gold under the growing light. The others stood motionless, staring, transfixed like witnesses at the beginning of a revelation they couldn't yet understand. Elena backed away, whispering, "You're making another mistake." Ronan's voice was almost tender now. "No, we're keeping a promise." The sea knocked again, louder this time, the sound echoing through the ruins like a drumbeat. And as the mist thickened, curling around their feet, Elena realized the truth she had always feared. The sea wasn't answering their machines. It was answering her. The ocean remembered the one who had woken it, and now it was calling her name again. As the gold shimmer bled across the surface, Ronan looked back once, his voice quiet, almost reverent. "It's time, Elena. The bargain has begun." And beneath the rising tide, something stirred, slow, deliberate, and eternal, as if the heart of the sea had heard its own name spoken aloud. The storm didn't come with lightning, this time it came with silence. A heavy, suffocating quiet that rolled over the sea like a curtain being drawn before the final act. The waves had gone flat again, unnaturally smooth, reflecting the sky in a sheet of dull silver. The air buzzed faintly, metallic, like a wire humming in the distance. Elena Marlowe stood at the cliff's edge, the salt wind cold against her face. Behind her, the research camp was chaos. Drones lay in pieces, monitors flickered with static, and the men from the Arcadian Foundation argued in frantic whispers. They'd stopped pretending they were in control. Only Ronan remained calm. He stood apart from them, staring at the sea as if it were an old friend finally returning. His expression was neither fear nor triumph. It was something quieter, resolution. The faint golden haze that had begun rising from the waves was brighter now, spreading across the tide in soft, rhythmic pulses. It wasn't light, not truly. It was the kind of glow that came from within, from something breathing, something remembering. Elena's voice broke the silence. "You did this." Ronan didn't turn. "We both did." She stepped closer, anger flaring through her exhaustion. "No, I buried it. I drowned it. You woke it again." He looked back at her, eyes calm, almost sad. "You didn't bury it, Elena. You taught it to survive." Her breath caught. "What are you talking about?" "The gold dust," he said softly. "It clings, it spreads. You sealed the chamber, but you carried it with you. You think it's been sleeping beneath the waves, but it's been breathing through you." Elena took a step back, shaking her head. "No." Ronan's gaze held hers. "Why do you think it followed you here? Why do you think it never hurt you? It doesn't see you as a threat. It sees you as part of itself." The words hit her like a blow. The memory of the faint hum in her bones, the warmth in her hands that never faded, the way her dreams pulsed with gold, all of it came flooding back. Her voice trembled. "Then what happens when it fully wakes?" Ronan turned back toward the sea. "It returns to the surface, and it won't stop with this coastline." He started walking toward the water, his steps deliberate, reverent. "The Arcadian team thinks they can contain it. They can't. It doesn't want containment, it wants to become what it once was. The ocean was only its first cradle." Elena followed him down the crumbling path toward the shore. The sand glowed faintly beneath their feet now, the particles of gold in the grains swirling with every step like living dust. She caught up to him near the edge where the waves whispered against the rocks. "If you know it can't be stopped, then why are you helping it?" Ronan's answer was quiet. "Because it isn't evil, it's evolution. It's what the world forgot it could be before we learned to call it greed." Her voice rose. "It destroys everything it touches." "But whoever wrote this, they sound terrified." "That wasn't Solara," Ronan murmured. "That was his overseer, a man named Calver. He vanished 2 weeks before the final storm. Some of his letters were recovered from the seabed years later." They said the water itself began whispering. Her eyes met his. "Whispering what?" Ronan's voice dropped low. "Promises." The word lingered in the air like fog. Elena closed the ledger, suddenly unable to look at it. "If it could affect them, then how do we know it isn't affecting us?" Ronan didn't answer immediately. He moved toward the broken window, gazing out at the sea. "Because the difference between hearing and listening is choice," he said finally. Solara listened. "You can still choose not to." She rose from her chair, pacing. "You keep talking like this thing is alive, but it's metal, it's a structure, a relic." He turned to her. "You saw it move." Her pulse jumped. That could have been a current. "And the voices, the gold dust that burns but doesn't melt, the hum that follows you into your dreams." He took a slow step closer. "You know better." Elena's voice trembled. "Then what is it?" Ronan exhaled through his nose, steadying himself before he spoke. "The earliest entries in the Solara family archives mention a relic stolen from a wreck called El Velo del Sol, the Veil of the Sun. The ship carried treasure looted from a temple off the coast of Cartagena in 1609. Spanish logs said it wasn't gold they were after, but something the priests called El Corazon del Mar, the heart of the sea." He leaned closer, his tone low and grave. "They said it was the fragment of a fallen star that the ocean tried to keep, that it glowed beneath the waves and sang when the moon rose." Elena felt her skin prickle. "You think this relic is that?" "A piece of something not from here." Ronan's jaw tightened. "Every time man drags something divine out of its grave, we call it discovery, but sometimes it's theft." She turned toward the window. The horizon pulsed faintly gold, a slow rhythm beneath the black sea, like a dying heart refusing to stop. "You said it's spreading," she whispered. "What happens when it reaches the surface?" Ronan's voice was barely audible. "Then it stops pretending to sleep." For a moment, only the wind spoke, threading through the resort's hollow bones, carrying the sound of distant waves breaking against the rocks below. Elena closed her eyes. "If sealing it again means sinking the resort, we'll drown." "There's no coming back." Ronan nodded slowly. "You're right, but if we don't, the ocean will come for it anyway, and when it does, it won't stop at the shore." Her breath caught. She'd always thought of the sea as something alive, vast, mysterious, sentient in its own way. But now she felt the truth pressing in. Maybe the sea was not alive because of life, but because of what it had eaten. She turned back to the table, staring at the ledger again. The candle flame bent toward the open page, drawn as if by breath. The air felt charged. Then, without warning, the candle went out. The room plunged into darkness. "Elena," Ronan's voice cut through the black. "I'm here." She fumbled for her flashlight, the click echoing too loudly. When the beam came on, her stomach turned. The ledger was open again, its pages flipped to the very end. The ink shimmered with wetness, though the air was dry, and scrawled over the final entry, in fresh, glistening gold, were words that hadn't been there before. "The heart remembers its thief." Elena stumbled back, nearly dropping the light. "Ronan," he was already at her side, staring down at the words, his face pale. "It's reacting to you," he said softly. Her voice cracked. "How?" "You touched it. You brought it air again. That's enough." A low sound rumbled through the building, then distant but growing, not thunder, not the tide. It came from below, deep and resonant, like something vast shifting in its sleep. Dust rained from the ceiling. The sea beyond the window glowed brighter, pulsing in time with the vibration. Ronan grabbed his pack, stuffing the ledger inside. "We can't stay here." But Elena didn't move. She was staring at the water. The glow wasn't confined to the horizon anymore. It was crawling upward through the waves, threading like veins of gold through the dark. The ocean looked alive and hungry. "Elena!" Ronan shouted. She turned to him, her voice distant. "It's calling again." He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the doorway. "Then don't answer." They stumbled through the hallways as the resort groaned around them, beams cracking, the marble floor trembling beneath their feet. Water began seeping through the cracks, glowing faintly as it pooled across the tiles. Behind them, in the darkness of the lobby, the ledger pulsed once its cover, rising and falling like a breath before going still. By the time they reached the upper terrace, the glow beneath the waves had spread across the entire bay. The sea shone like molten glass, its reflection painting their faces in ghostly gold. Ronan turned to her, voice harsh against wind. "If you still want to save this place, this is your moment. We flooded all of it before that thing climbs any higher." Elena's throat was dry, and if we fail, he looked toward the glowing water, his expression hollow. "Then it won't be the sea that buries us." The wind howled through the ruins, carrying the sound of something vast stirring beneath the waves, a deep, steady rhythm that matched the pulse in her chest. As she stared out into the glowing ocean, Elena realized she was no longer afraid of drowning. She was afraid of what might rise to surface if she didn't. The ocean shimmered once more, brighter now, alive, awake, aware, and far below, buried beneath stone and salt, something opened its eyes. The storm returned without warning. One moment, the air was still heavy, suspended in that unnatural calm before violence, and next, the sky tore open with the roar of 1,000 waves. Wind screamed through the hollow ribs of the resort, ripping the tarps from the windows and hurling debris into the sea. Thunder rolled across the cliffs, long and low, like the voice of something ancient rising from beneath. Elena Marlowe ran through the corridors with her flashlight trembling in one hand, her oxygen tanks clattering against her back. Rain cascaded through the broken roof in silver sheets. Every window beat and rattled as if fists of water were trying to break inside. She'd spent the night sealing the ledger and her dive notes into a waterproof bag, her movements mechanical, haunted. Ronan had disappeared at dawn, leaving only a note scrawled on a scrap of paper. "Meet me below the east terrace. The tide is shifting faster than we thought." That was hours ago. Now, as lightning split the sky and the ocean bellowed below, she wasn't sure if he was even still alive. The plan, if it could even be called that, was simple and impossible at once. Descend through the reopened passage into the Solara chamber and trigger the old containment valves to flood it completely. Sink the vault before the storm broke it apart. It was the only way to stop whatever was stirring beneath the gold. But the wind screamed like it already knew they were too late. Elena reached the stairwell and gripped the railing with both hands as another tremor shook the ground. The entire structure groaned. Water ran down the walls like sweat. She switched on her headlamp and descended into the dark. The stairwell led to the submerged corridor, or what was left of it. The sea had already claimed most of it back. Waves surged in rhythmic bursts through the opening at the bottom, gushing into the lower floors before being pulled back with suction so strong it rattled her teeth. The roar was deafening. Through the chaos she saw him. Ronan stood waist deep in the water, soaked to the bone, his flashlight clutched between his teeth as he worked to fasten something metallic along the wall, a small cylinder connected to a coiled wire. Explosives. She splashed forward, shouting over the roar. "You're insane. You'll bring the whole cliff down. That's the idea, he yelled back, his voice raw against the wind. You want to seal it. This is how we do it. The thunder cracked again, drowning her protest. She waded closer, her boots dragging through the current. You said we'd use the containment valves. They're corroded shut. The flood system's dead. This is the only way to collapse the vault before it tears itself open. Elena froze. Behind him, the water wasn't just surging anymore, it was glowing. A golden pulse beat beneath the waves, spreading outward from the chamber like veins of molten light. The hum she'd felt before was back, stronger now, shaking through the stone like a heartbeat. "Ronan," she began. But he turned sharply, eyes wild. "I told you, it's not just a relic," he shouted. "It's consciousness. The chamber was never meant to hold it forever." Another surge of lightning illuminated his face, and for the briefest second, she thought she saw the shimmer of gold in his eyes again. Her heart hammered. "You're infected too." He looked away, his expression unreadable. "It doesn't matter. What matters is we finish this before it finishes us." He tossed her a small remote, slick with seawater. "When I say go, you press the red switch. That'll detonate the lower charges. The upper floors will collapse. The chamber will seal, and this place will be gone." Elena stared at the remote in her hand, rain running down her face like tears. "And what about you?" Ronan gave a small, hollow smile. "I'll make sure it holds." The next wave hit hard, slamming them both against the wall. Salt water surged into her lungs, choking her breath. When she surfaced, Ronan was already moving toward the glowing opening. She followed without thinking. The air temperature dropped sharply as they entered the submerged corridor. Every surface shimmered with gold veins now crawling through the cracks like living light. The hum grew louder, higher, almost a melody. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was a voice. It whispered through the water, not in words but in shapes, memories, sensations, fragments of something vast. Ancient, she saw flashes behind her eyelids, waves swallowing cities, faces turned to the sun, gold melting into the sea. "Elena," Ronan's voice snapped her back. He was ahead, struggling to secure the last charge to the marble pillar near the entrance of the Solara chamber. "We're almost there." She swam to him, her flashlight cutting through the swirling gold dust that filled the corridor. When she looked down, she realized the floor wasn't stone anymore, it was metal. Smooth, polished, seamless. The same alloy from the relic. It rippled faintly under her touch, as though breathing. "Ronan," she whispered through her mask, "it's growing." He looked down too and froze. The surface beneath their feet pulsed once, like a living organism responding to its name. The hum deepened, the walls vibrating so violently that cracks raced through the marble. Then the water exploded upward. The shockwave hurled them both against the ceiling. Her flashlight shattered, plunging them into darkness lit only by the molten glow below. Through the chaos, she saw movement, a form rising from the center of the chamber, emerging from the gold dust like a phantom pulled from memory. It wasn't human. It wasn't even solid. It was the shape of light itself, a figure woven from the same shimmer that haunted her dreams. It drifted toward them, silent, graceful, immense. Ronan raised the detonator, shouting something she couldn't hear. The figure's light flared, and the detonator sparked. The circuitry burned to ash in his hand. The hum became a scream. Elena's vision blurred. The light was everywhere now, crawling over her skin, filling her lungs, burning behind her eyes. She felt weightless, as though her body had been turned to water. Through it all, a single thought echoed in her mind, not her own, but placed there. "You open the door, now you will see." The world around her twisted, the chamber stretching outward into endless golden corridors. She saw flashes, Solara himself, building, digging, sealing, his face carved with desperation. He wasn't greedy, he was terrified. The gold wasn't wealth, it was prison. Bars, her scream broke the vision. The illusion snapped, and she was back in the collapsing corridor. Elena, Ronan's hand found hers. Now, detonate the backup. Her trembling fingers clutched the remote. The red switch blinked through the water. She pressed it. The explosion ripped through the chamber like thunder underwater. Fire and foam collided with stone and gold, the force hurling them backward through the current. Columns fell, the dome above fracturing into molten fragments. The last thing she saw before blacking out was the golden figure sinking, folding into itself like a dying sun as the sea rushed in to bury it once more. When she woke, she was floating near the surface, half conscious, the resort reduced to twisted skeletons. Of stone, the storm still raged, but the glow beneath the waves had dimmed faint now, retreating into silence. Ronan was nowhere in sight. Her voice broke the wind in a whisper. "It's done." But even as she said it, the water shimmered faintly around her, gold dust drifting upward like breath from something not quite dead. The sea had taken back its secret for now. As she drifted toward the shore, waves rocking her gently, a terrible calm settled over her. The storm had done its part, the vault was sealed, but deep beneath the drowned ruins, she could still feel it, that slow, rhythmic pulse in the dark. Not gone, sleeping, and as lightning cracked across the horizon, the thunder that followed didn't sound like the sky. It sounded like the ocean whispering her name. When the explosion died, silence followed, not the silence of peace, but the kind that comes after something has screamed itself hoarse. The world had gone white for a moment, and then gold, and now it was only gray. Elena drifted near the ruins of the East Terrace, gasping through salt and smoke, her body trembling with exhaustion. The waves heaved beneath her, thick with debris and the taste of iron. Somewhere in the fog of her vision, pieces of the resort's marble pillars rolled under the current like bones stripped of flesh. She turned her head weakly toward the open water. The glow had faded, but it wasn't gone. Faint veins of light still pulsed beneath the black tide, receding into the deep like embers sinking into ash. The hum had stopped, but its echo remained in her ribs, like something alive still breathing below. "Ronan," she rasped, her voice barely sound. There was no answer. Rain pelted her face, stinging her skin raw. She tried to call again, but her voice broke into the wind. Lightning flashed across the horizon, lighting up the wreckage around her. The entire east wing of the resort was gone, swallowed by the sea. She forced her arms to move, swimming toward the place where she'd last seen him. Each stroke felt heavier, as though the ocean itself resisted her, pulling at her limbs with invisible hands. Her fingers brushed against something beneath the surface, a rope, a torn harness, a shred of dark fabric. Ronan's, she dove. The water swallowed her again. Below, visibility blurred into a nightmare of drifting debris and gold dust. Her light cut through it in pale beams, revealing twisted metal, shattered tiles, and the slow dance of paper fragments, notes, maps, pieces of the ledger's copied pages, turning like ghosts in suspension. Then she saw him. Ronan lay half buried beneath a collapsed beam near the chamber's entrance, his body pinned against the glowing floor. The water around him shimmered faintly, like sunlight trapped under ice. "Ronan!" She screamed, though the sound died the moment it left her mouth. She kicked toward him, heart hammering, lungs burning. The pressure in the water made every motion ache. When she reached him, she tugged at the beam with all her strength, but it didn't budge. Ronan's eyes flickered open, dull but aware. He reached toward her, his hand trembling. The moment their fingers touched, something surged through her, not pain, not heat, but memory. For a fraction of a second, she saw through his mind. A vision, brief, chaotic, searing. He wasn't a filmmaker. He never was. He'd been sent here years ago, part of the secret organization that kept watch over Solara's hidden chambers. He'd found them all destroyed, all except this one. His mission wasn't to document history. It was to make sure no one repeated it. And when she bought the ruins for $250, he saw his failure walking toward him in human form. The connection broke. Elena's tears mingled with the salt water as she fought the beam again, screaming into her regulator. "Hold on." Ronan's voice came through the calm, faint but clear. "It's too late." She shook her head violently, bubbles bursting from her mask. "No, it's not. We can get you out." His hand gripped her wrist. "Listen to me. The detonations didn't seal it completely. The lower chamber is still open." "What?" He coughed, blood clouding the water around him. "The failsafe didn't trigger. The 13th ray, it's still breathing. You have to finish it." She tried to protest, but his voice hardened, urgency cutting through the pain. "You know how. The valves, the pressure conduits along the ridge. Overload them, flood the sanctum completely. Let the sea take it." Tears stung her eyes. "That'll bury you too." Ronan managed a faint smile. "That's the point." A tremor rippled through the chamber. The walls moaned. Dust rose like smoke as cracks crawled through the floor. The golden veins flared again, brighter now like arteries fighting to reopen. "Elena," he said softly, his voice barely audible, "don't let it wake." She hesitated, every instinct screaming to save him, to try again. But the look in his eyes, calm, resigned, human, told her what she already knew. She squeezed his hand once, then pushed upward toward the tunnel. His last words followed her through the dark. "Seal it with the sea." The current pulled at her violently as she reached the control bay, what remained of the old geothermal vents Solaris engineers had built decades ago. The metal valves glowed faintly under layers of coral and salt. The pressure dials were long frozen, but the flood system still hummed faintly. With life, she tore open a rusted panel, wires hanging like veins. Her hands moved on instinct, reconnecting, rerouting, overriding every dive, every wreck, every salvage she'd ever survived, suddenly converging in this single moment. Lightning flashed above, the water pulsing with reflected light. Her fingers found the final switch, a corroded lever sealed under glass. Elena's breath came hard and fast. She thought of the ledger's words. "The light remains in darkness." She slammed the lever down. For an instant, nothing. Then, a thunderous roar from the deep. The vents exploded open, releasing columns of boiling water and trapped gas. The entire chamber below convulsed, the sea folding in on itself. The golden light flared once, violently, and then imploded, sucked downward in a spiral of pure force. The current hit her like a wall, hurling her backward into darkness. She tumbled through water and wreckage, lungs burning, consciousness flickering. The world became sound, the roar of collapsing stone, the rush of rising tide, the final heartbeat of something ancient being drowned. When she broke the surface again, she wasn't sure if she was alive or dreaming. The resort was gone, nothing but a smear of black rock and foam. The cliffs had collapsed into the sea. The storm still raged, but the wind no longer screamed. It sighed. Elena clung to a piece of driftwood, her body shaking uncontrollably. The salt water was thick with silt and gold dust, not glowing, just drifting, weightless, like the remnants of a dying star. She turned toward the horizon. The light beneath the waves was gone. Ronan was gone. Everything was gone. She cried, then not out of fear, not even grief, but release. For the first time, the sea was silent. Hours passed before. The storm began to fade. The rain softened. The thunder receded into distant murmurs. By the time dawn broke, the ocean lay still again, glassy and infinite, as though nothing had ever disturbed it. Elena floated there, barely conscious, as the sunlight spread across the water. In that fragile light, she could almost imagine the sea forgiving her, or perhaps pretending to. But deep beneath her, under miles of water and ruin, the Solara chamber slept again, and in the faintest shimmer of gold far below, something turned once in the dark, not dead, not awake, but dreaming. The ocean had reclaimed its heart, As the tide carried her slowly toward the shore, Elena whispered into the wind, her voice thin, fading, "It's over." But even as the words left her lips, she could swear she heard a whisper in return, soft, patient, eternal, "Not yet." And as the waves rocked her gently against the endless horizon, the gold dust around her rose in slow spirals like breath returning to a sleeping god. The sea had taken its secret back, but the story of what it held beneath would never rest again. The sea was quiet, now deceptively quiet. Days had passed since the flood, though Elena Marlowe had stopped counting time. The world beyond the coastline might have kept moving, but here, along the shattered rim of the Maravilla ruins, everything was still. The ocean stretched out like glass, no hum, no pulse, no shimmer, only a silence that pressed against the world like a lid sealing a secret. She sat by the fire she'd built from driftwood and broken beams, wrapped in a weathered jacket that smelled of salt and memory. The storm had taken everything, her equipment, her recordings, her sense of certainty. Even her reflection in the cracked glass of her dive mask felt like someone else now, but she'd survived. The chamber was gone, sealed by the sea and by her own hand. That should have been the end of it. And yet, deep in the quiet, she could still feel the faint ache of its presence, like a song she couldn't stop hearing once she'd learned its melody. He turned, eyes burning. "No, Elena, we destroy everything we touch. The difference is it remembers." The sea exhaled then, a long, low sound that rolled through the cliffs like a sigh. Beneath the surface, shapes moved. The ruins of the Solara chamber were stirring again, golden veins spreading outward, linking into the seabed like roots. She stared at the water, her breath shaking. "If it spreads, it'll consume everything. You said it yourself, it needs vessels, hosts. It'll turn the whole coast into one." Ronan nodded slowly. "Unless you end it." Her eyes snapped to him. "End it?" He met her gaze. "You're the connection. It responds to you. If you go down there again, if you open the core completely, you can trigger collapse from the inside. Finish what the flood started." Elena stared at him, disbelief turning to fury. "You're asking me to die?" He didn't flinch. "I'm asking you to decide if anyone else should have to." She looked out at the horizon, where the line between sea and sky had blurred into gold. The hum beneath her feet deepened. The world felt smaller now, the air thinner, the distance between heartbeats longer. Ronan stepped closer. "The longer we wait, the stronger it gets. The containment grid Solara built is failing. In another hour, the whole coast will light up like a heartbeat." She turned toward him. "And what about you?" He hesitated, then opened his hand. In his palm lay the small glass vial, the one filled with gold dust. It shimmered faintly, alive, restless. "I'll be with you," he said. "One last descent." Elena's chest tightened. "You're infected. If you go down there," he smiled faintly, "then maybe I belong there." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the deep salt, decay, and something almost sweet. The tide began to rise again, crawling over the rocks like fingers reaching for shore. She looked back toward the Arcadian crew, their voices faint and panicked in the distance. They were already packing equipment, shouting orders, trying to salvage data from dying machines. The sea didn't care. The sea never did. Elena's mind went quiet, the anger drained out of her, replaced by a strange calm, the kind that only comes when there's nothing left to lose. She looked down at her trembling hands, at the faint shimmer of gold between her fingers. Ronan was right. It wasn't leaving her. It was inside her, not consuming, but calling. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "We go together." Ronan nodded once. No smile, no relief, just understanding. They gathered what they needed: 2 oxygen tanks, 1 diving light, and the remote detonator she'd built from the Arcadian equipment. A single charge strong enough to collapse the remaining vault completely. The sky above them darkened, clouds spiraling inward like a massive whirlpool. Thunder rolled far out to sea, deep and deliberate. The tide surged, waves breaking harder against the rocks, as if urging them onward. Elena fastened her gear with trembling fingers. Ronan helped her adjust the straps, his movements careful, methodical, the way divers move when words are useless. When she finally met his gaze, the world around them had dimmed into shades of grey and gold. Ronan said quietly, "If you don't come back." She cut him off with a whisper, "Then make sure it ends." He nodded once, "It will." They descended together as the first drops of rain began to fall, slow, heavy, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of the world sinking with theirs. The sea welcomed them without resistance this time, its surface parting as they slipped beneath. Down they went through layers of dim light and silt, through the ruins of what once was the Solara Spa. The world above faded, replaced by the deep, soft, endless hum. The gold veins pulsed brighter now, leading them like a trail through the dark. Every stroke downward felt heavier, the pressure of the deep pressing against their lungs, their blood, their thoughts. And then through the clouded water, the vault appeared, the Solara chamber, rebuilt by the sea itself. Its dome had cracked completely open, light spilling from within in steady, blinding waves. The heart of the ocean pulsed inside it, immense and luminous, like a sun drowning beneath its own reflection. Ronan's voice crackled through the calms, "This is it." Elena didn't answer. She could feel it now in her chest, in her veins, in every beat of her heart. The gold wasn't outside her anymore. It was resonating with her, recognizing her. As they drifted toward the opening, she saw movement within the light shadows turning, almost human in shape, as if the sea remembered every soul that had ever drowned here. Ronan reached for the detonator. "We place it at the base of the core," he said. "Then we leave." Elena stared into the light. "It won't let us leave." Ronan hesitated, and she saw it then, in his reflection, faint but certain. The gold had reached his eyes entirely. The hum deepened, surrounding them both. Something vast stirred within the chamber, rising slowly, the relic itself, the heart of the sea. It shimmered like a living sun, its edges fluid, impossible to define. Elena's pulse synced with it, her body trembling as the sound grew into something almost like a voice. "You carried me to the light. Now carry the light to the end." Her breath caught. "Elena," Ronan's voice said through the calms, distant, hollow. Now she looked down at the detonator in her hand. Her thumb hovered over the switch. The chamber pulsed again, brighter, louder, and for a heartbeat, she could see everything. Solara's men sealing the vault, the flood swallowing them whole, the centuries of silence, and herself standing in their place. History repeating one last time, her voice trembled. "It's never going to end, is it?" Ronan's eyes met hers through the water. "Then end it yourself." The relic pulsed once more, as if it understood. The water burned with gold, and Elena Marlowe dove into the light. The light swallowed everything. There was no sense of depth anymore, no up or down, only endless gold. It wasn't heat or pain, but immersion, as if every atom in her body had been dissolved into light itself. Elena couldn't feel her heartbeat. She could hear it deep and resonant, like the sea's pulse echoing inside her chest. The relic, the heart of the sea, hung before her, suspended in the glow. Its shape shifted constantly, neither metal nor flame. It breathed. Every ripple of its light carried something familiar, something human, memories, voices, moments that weren't hers but felt like they had always belonged to her. She saw Solara kneeling before it, trembling, broken, his face wet with tears and salt. "Forgive me," he whispered in the vision. "I only wanted to understand." Then he was gone, consumed by light. Elena reached toward the relic. The closer she came, the louder it grew, not in volume, but in meaning. The hum became language, the language became thought, the thought became a flood. I was born from the dark between stars. They pulled me from silence, and I became their mirror. They saw their hunger in me and called it gold. Her body shook as the images rushed through her civilizations, drowning in their own reflection. Men building temples out of greed and calling it faith. The sea swallowing their creations to protect the world above. It wasn't evil, it was memory, the ocean's oldest wound. You came to bury me, the voice said, vast and tender, but you carried me instead. Her hand brushed the relic's surface, and the world around her erupted into visions. She was back in the Solara resort, but it was whole again, pristine marble, chandeliers blazing. Guests moved through the hallways, laughing, drinking, the sound of music echoing from below. But beneath the floor, she could hear the same heartbeat, faint but constant. Ronan appeared beside her, his reflection perfect, his eyes still grey. "Do you see it now?" he asked. She turned to him. "It's a lie, all of it." He smiled sadly. "It's a memory. The sea never forgets what it buries." The floor beneath them rippled. Water began seeping through the cracks, pooling around their feet. The music above turned to distortion, notes stretching, twisting, dissolving into static. Ronan looked at her, calm, even as the water rose to their knees. "This isn't destruction," he said softly. "It's release." Elena's breath came shallow. "You said we could end it." He nodded slowly. "You can." The vision broke like glass, and she was back in the deep. The relic loomed before her again, pulsing in time with her heart. The detonator was still in her hand, the last piece of the world that was still mechanical, human, finite. Through the glow, she saw movement. Ronan, drifting toward the relic, his body trembling as if drawn by invisible gravity. His oxygen hose hung loose, bubbles spiraling upward. "Elena," his voice came faint through the calms. "It's beautiful." "Ronan, stop." He didn't listen. He reached out, fingertips grazing the edge of the light, and the gold swallowed him whole. For a heartbeat, his form shone brilliant, almost divine. Then it shattered into motes of dust, dissolving into the relic's glow. Ronan, her scream vanished into the water. The relic pulsed once stronger now, brighter, and she understood. It wasn't absorbing him. It was becoming him. The gold wasn't just consuming. It was remembering, weaving every soul it touched into its endless reflection. Elena's tears mixed with the salt water in her mask. She looked at the detonator again, her thumb hovering over the switch. "You want release," she whispered. "Then I'll give it to you." Her voice trembled, but her eyes were steady. No more chambers, no more vaults, no more cages. She pressed the trigger. The world detonated. A silent explosion bloomed through the deep, not fire, but pressure. The relic cracked, light bleeding from its core like liquid sunlight. The sound that followed wasn't a scream. It was a song, the same melody she had heard in her dreams, now vast and complete. The chamber imploded, walls folding inward as the sea rushed in to fill the void. The pressure crushed everything: stone, gold, memory, until the deep itself became one with the light. Elena was thrown backward, her body spinning through the torrent, her lungs burning, her mind fracturing under the sound. The gold dust rose around her, spiraling like galaxies in collapse. In her final moments of clarity, she saw the truth, the relic's light rising through the water, dividing into countless threads that drifted upward, dissolving into the ocean's infinite body. Not destruction. Transformation. The ocean glowed from within, a heartbeat stretching across miles, then dimming, then stilling. Elena's mask cracked. Her breath came shallow, her vision blurring into a kaleidoscope of gold and blue. The detonator slipped from her hand, spinning into the darkness below. Her body began to rise weightless, slow, the current lifting her like a child returning to sleep. Above her, the surface shimmered faintly, the light of dawn breaking through the storm clouds. And as she ascended, she felt warmth spreading through her, not the relic's hunger, but its peace. A voice whispered, faint and fading, "You returned me to silence, now rest." Her eyes closed. The sea cradled her in its arms. When she broke the surface, there was no storm, no wreckage, only calm water and morning light. She floated on her back, breathing shallow, the sky above her pale and vast. The horizon glowed softly gold for one final moment before fading back to blue. The sea was quiet, completely quiet. Elena turned her face toward the sun, tears lost to salt. Ronan's name lingered on her lips, but no sound followed. Somewhere beneath her, the last fragments of the Solara chamber sank into the abyss sealed by the ocean's own hand. And in the silence that followed, the world exhaled. The flood was over, the gold was gone. But as the current carried her toward the coast, a faint shimmer trailed behind her, dissolving into the light, not curse, not hunger, just memory. A reminder that the sea never forgets what was once part of its heart. As the shore grew closer and her body drifted into unconsciousness, the waves rolled gently, almost tenderly, and the wind whispered across the surface, carrying the faint echo of her voice, and perhaps, just perhaps, the ocean's reply. "Sleep now, child of the tide." And then there was nothing but the sea, endless, eternal, and finally at peace. The morning after the flood was too still to be real. The ocean stretched out before her in an endless sheet of pale light, calm as glass, untouched by memory. For the first time in weeks, maybe in months, the sea didn't whisper or hum. It simply breathed. Elena Marlowe opened her eyes slowly, the world returning to her in fragments, light first, then wind, then pain. She was lying on the sand, half buried by the tide. The waves moved around her gently, almost respectfully, washing the salt and gold from her skin. Her first breath came sharp and wet, dragging air into lungs that hadn't been sure they'd ever fill again. The sound of it startled the gulls nearby into flight. She rolled onto her back, coughing until her throat burned, then lay still, staring up at the sky. The storm had passed. The clouds were gone. Only a single beam of sunlight pierced the horizon, golden, faint, pure. For a long time, she didn't move. She couldn't. The exhaustion wasn't just physical. It lived deeper, somewhere between her heartbeat and her bones. The silence around her felt alien, so complete that she almost missed the hum. Almost then she heard it, not from the sea, but from within herself. A heartbeat, steady, human, her own. She was alive. Elena sat up slowly, every joint stiff and sore. The shore around her was unrecognizable. The resort, the Solara ruins, were gone. Where once marble walls and broken terraces had stood, there was only open beach and driftwood scattered like bones. The cliffs had collapsed completely, sealing the last entrance to the chamber beneath tons of rock. The ocean had taken everything back. She rose unsteadily to her feet, swaying, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement, a boat, a flare, a human shape. Nothing. Only the tide and the wind. Her wetsuit was torn, streaked with salt and silt. Her dive computer blinked weakly, dead. Her oxygen tank was empty. The detonator, her camera, her journal, all gone. Everything she'd used to document her discovery had been erased, almost as if it had never happened. But she knew better. The silence wasn't emptiness. It was closure. The sea had sealed its secret again. And in that silence, for the first time, she felt no need to chase it. She began walking along the shoreline barefoot, leaving shallow prints that the waves erased behind her almost immediately. Each step hurt, but the pain was grounding, real, proof that she'd returned to the surface. The sun climbed higher, warming her skin. She didn't know how long she walked before she reached the remnants of the Arcadian camp. Their tents were gone, shredded or swept away, but a few metal cases remained half buried in sand. One of them still blinked faintly with a dying signal light. Elena knelt, brushing the sand away. The case was marked with the Arcadian emblem, the same one that had been engraved on Ronan's gear. She opened it carefully. Inside, waterlogged equipment, papers, and a small waterproof drive. She hesitated, then pocketed the drive. The rest she buried beneath the sand. There was no one left to contact, no one left to explain it to. Even if she tried, who would believe her? That a relic of light had slept beneath the sea for nearly a century, that gold could breathe, remember, dream. Some things weren't meant to be proven. They were meant to be understood. She climbed the ridge slowly, following the curve of the coast until she reached a stretch of high ground. From there, she could see the expanse of ocean stretching beyond sight, smooth, glimmering faintly in the sun. It looked harmless again, but she knew what lay beneath the buried chamber, the relic's fractured heart, and the gold that now slept eternally in the folds of the tide. And somewhere in that vast silence, maybe, a memory of Ronan still drifted. She sank to her knees, staring out at the horizon. "I finished it," she whispered, though the wind almost took the words away. "It's done." But part of her wondered if he could hear her or if the sea could. A wave broke against the rocks below, sending a fine mist into the air. The droplets caught the sunlight, scattering it into thousands of tiny rainbows that shimmered for only a moment before fading. Elena smiled faintly. "You always find a way to shine, don't you?" Her voice trembled, not from fear now, but from the quiet ache of release. She let herself cry slow, silent tears that blended with salt and wind until they felt like part of the sea itself. When she could finally breathe again, she turned away from the water and looked inland. The world beyond the ruins was green and alive, the coastal forest untouched by storm or gold. Birds moved between the trees, their songs faint but certain. It was time to leave. Elena began walking inland, every step a small act of defiance against the pull of the ocean behind her. But even as she moved away, she carried it with her, the hum, the light, the memory. Not as a curse, as understanding. At the edge of the forest, she stopped one last time and looked back. The tide was coming in again, slow and gentle, washing over the last traces of the resort. And for just a second, no more than a heartbeat, she thought she saw something glint beneath the surface. A single flash of gold, faint as a dying ember. But when she blinked, it was gone. Elena exhaled, smiling softly. "Rest," she whispered. "We both need it." Then she turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving the ocean to its silence once more. Behind her, the waves rolled in, slow and rhythmic, smoothing the scars of the shore. The wind carried her footprints away, erasing them with careful patience, as if the sea itself was closing the final page of a story too heavy to keep open. And somewhere deep beneath, where light no longer reached, the gold slept peacefully, not waiting, not wanting, simply existing in its eternal quiet. The ocean, for now, was at peace. But in that fragile calm, the horizon shimmered faintly, the color of dawn and memory, as though the sea was smiling back. By evening, the light began to change. The ocean turned from blue to bronze as the sun descended, and the world took on that brief, impossible glow that lives between day and night, the hour when everything feels suspended, neither beginning nor ending. Elena Marlowe sat on a weathered driftwood log overlooking the beach, her hands clasped loosely around a cup of rainwater she'd collected in an old tin. Her reflection trembled in it, haloed by fading gold. The waves were calm again. Every crest broke softly, dissolving into lace at the shore. It was strange. She thought how something so vast could look so innocent after swallowing an empire. She could almost believe it hadn't happened at all. But her body remembered. Every muscle ached, every breath carried the faint sting of salt deep in her lungs. Her skin still shimmered faintly where the dust had touched it, not visibly gold anymore, but luminous, like it had absorbed the light it had once feared. The silence around her wasn't empty, it was deliberate, reverent. The sea had stopped speaking, as if in respect for the one who had finally listened. For the first time since she'd bought those ruins for $250, Elena felt peace. She thought about the person she'd been before all this, the scientist who believed knowledge could heal anything, who believed light was truth and discovery was redemption. But the sea had taught her something older, that some truths don't heal. Some truths simply are, and yet she wasn't bitter, she wasn't broken. She had given the ocean back its heart. Now, sitting here on the edge of what once was the Solara resort, she realized that the treasure she'd been searching for had never been gold or glory, it was this. This silence, this stillness, this proof that she had survived what no one else could. The tide crept closer, its edge catching the last light of day. The reflection of the setting sun rippled across the water like molten glass, painting the horizon in liquid fire. Elena lifted her gaze. The sky was the same color as the gold that had once haunted her, but softer now, gentle, free of hunger. She whispered into the wind, "You're finally home." The sea didn't answer, but a single wave rolled higher than the rest, curling against the rocks before retreating as if nodding in acknowledgement. She smiled faintly. "Good," she murmured, "stay there." The memory of Ronan flickered through her mind, not the man he became, but the one who first stood on the shore beside her, before the greed, before the madness. She saw him laughing, boots soaked, wind in his hair, calling the ruins beautiful. She realized he'd meant it. Even then, he had loved the mystery of it, not for what it could give him, but for what it could hide. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small waterproof drive she'd found earlier, Arcadian's final artifact. She turned it over in her hands, studying its faintly scratched surface. It was still functional. She could restore it, publish it, expose everything, but she didn't need to. The truth wasn't in the data. It was in the silence that followed the flood. Without hesitation, she stood and walked to the edge of the surf. The drive felt weightless now, like a lie she no longer needed to carry. She threw it into the waves. It vanished instantly, swallowed whole. The sea didn't roar or rise. It simply took it and kept its promise of silence. Elena exhaled slowly, letting the weight lift from her chest. The wind caught her hair, sweeping it back as she closed her eyes. "Let history rest," she whispered. "Let it all rest." A gull cried overhead, cutting through the quiet. When she opened her eyes again, the sun had almost disappeared, leaving only a burnished path of gold across the water, not the cursed glow of the relic, but the gentle shimmer of life continuing. She followed that light with her gaze until it faded into dusk. When the last of the sun dipped below the horizon, the sea shifted color again, no longer gold, but deep indigo, peaceful, whole. Elena turned away from the water and began walking inland. Her footsteps sank softly into the sand, erased immediately by the next wave. Each one felt lighter than the last. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. For the first time, the story wasn't calling her name. The ocean could keep its secrets. She had her own, now, a secret of peace, of survival, of knowing that she had done what no one else could. At the top of the ridge, she paused to look out one final time. The sea glimmered faintly in the moonlight, the surface smooth and endless. Somewhere below that surface, she knew, the Solara chamber lay in silence, its heart forever sealed, its song faded to memory. The wind brushed past her cheek, soft and warm, carrying the faint scent of salt and something new, something alive. Maybe it was forgiveness. Elena smiled. She whispered, "Thank you." The words carried effortlessly, lost to the waves but heard nonetheless. As she stepped into the darkness of the forest beyond, the sea's rhythm followed her, steady, gentle, eternal. Behind her, the tide rolled over the last piece of the broken coast, smoothing it flat. The ruins were gone, the gold was gone, only the story remained, carried forever in the whisper of the waves. And as the moon rose, the light danced across the surface of the water, forming the faint outline of a sun with 13 rays before dissolving into the tide, not a warning this time, but a benediction. The ocean was whole again, and so was she. As the night deepened, Elena Marlowe disappeared into the shadows of the trees, leaving the sea to guard what it had always kept best: silence. The waves moved in rhythm, calm and endless, whispering the final truth that the world would never know. The gold sleeps, but the light remains. And for the first time in a century, the coast exhaled. The story was finally over. It had been 1 year since the flood. The ocean, ever indifferent, had already begun reclaiming the story, softening cliffs, burying ruins, washing away footprints. The coast that once whispered secrets now slept in sunlight, quiet and unassuming, as if nothing extraordinary had ever stirred beneath its waves. But the world hadn't forgotten. Not completely. Whispers traveled through seaside towns and diver circles about the woman who bought a drowned resort for $250, who vanished in a storm and returned with eyes that carried the horizon inside them. They called her survivor, explorer, myth. No one could agree which. Elena Marlowe never corrected them. She lived far from the sea now, in a small coastal town several miles inland, where the air smelled faintly of pine instead of salt. The cottage she'd chosen sat on a hillside, its windows facing the west, so, even in her distance, she could still see the shimmer of water at dusk. Each morning, she woke to the sound of wind moving through tall grass instead of waves. And each night, she lit a single candle by the window, not for prayer, but remembrance. The sea didn't call her any more, but she sometimes thought it listened. The townspeople knew her as quiet but kind. The woman with the notebooks, always writing by the cafe window or walking with her head tilted slightly toward the breeze, as though hearing music others couldn't. Children sometimes asked if she'd really seen gold at the bottom of the ocean. Elena only smiled and said, "The kind that doesn't belong to anyone." But when she was alone, when the air grew still, and the world went quiet, she still felt it. That faint hum, not haunting, not burdening, but echoing. A reminder that some connections don't break, they evolve. Her home had become a museum of silence, artifacts of her old life, arranged like memories she was finally ready to live with. Her cracked dive mask, the rusted compass, a stone from the terrace that had once overlooked the Solara chamber. And above them, framed and carefully sealed, was the photograph she'd taken before it all began, the resort in its ruin, the sky a bruised violet, the sea whispering at its feet. Beneath it, in careful handwriting, she'd written, "Some treasures are meant to stay buried." It wasn't guilt she carried anymore, it was reverence. In the months following her survival, the ocean currents had shifted dramatically across that part of the coast. Scientists called it a post-seismic realignment. Elena called it forgiveness. The sea had closed its wound. Still, the story refused to die. Reporters had come first, one, then many. They wanted facts, timelines, explanations. What really happened to the Solara chamber? What caused the storm? What became of the Arcadian team? Elena had smiled, offered tea, and told them the truth, or at least a version of it, that the world could accept. She told them about the flood, the ruins, the greed of men chasing gold that didn't want to be found. She spoke of storms and mistakes and redemption, of what happens when humanity digs too deep into the silence that protects it. Her words spread first in local papers, then in documentaries, then in translated features across oceans. The world loved a mystery wrapped in morality, and Elena Marlowe became the reluctant guardian of one. Publishers approached her for years. At first she refused, but one winter, when the nights grew long and the silence turned too heavy, she began to write. Not as an archaeologist, not even as a witness, but as a storyteller. The result was a memoir titled The Weight of Gold. It wasn't about treasure, it was about truth, about how easily beauty becomes hunger, how greed can wear the mask of discovery, how the line between salvation and obsession dissolves when the world promises you more than peace. She wrote of the ruins and storms, of the light beneath the sea, of Ronan not as villain or savior, but as both. A man who saw the world's hunger and believed he could guide it. A man who drowned trying to prove that gold could be contained. But most of all, she wrote about forgiveness not from the sea, but from herself. The book was published quietly, without fanfare. Yet somehow it found its way to millions. People read it not for the mystery, but for the message. They said her words felt like the ocean, vast, timeless, and heavy with meaning. She received letters from around the world, from divers, poets, widows, and wanderers, people who had lost something to the sea and found comfort in her story. Each letter began differently, but most ended the same. I understand now. And perhaps that was all she had ever wanted. One afternoon, as sunlight poured through her window, Elena sat at her desk and ran her fingers over a single gold fleck embedded in her writing journal's spine. She had no idea how it got there. Maybe it had always been. It no longer frightened her. It glowed softly in the light, not alive, not cursed, simply present. Outside, the wind carried the smell of rain. The horizon darkened, though no storm approached, just the slow turning of evening. She closed her notebook, stood, and stepped outside. The air was cool, the kind that hinted of the ocean even from miles away. She walked to the ridge where grass met sky. The world below bathed in amber light. The tide, though far, still shimmered faintly on the horizon, and as she watched it, she whispered, "I told your story." A soft gust passed through, carrying her words out to sea. She smiled. For a brief moment, the sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a single golden reflection across the distant water. It lingered just long enough for her to see the faint outline of a circle with 13 rays before it faded again. Not warning, not curse, blessing. Elena placed a hand over her heart. The hum was gone. What replaced it was something lighter, a rhythm that belonged wholly to her. As she turned to walk back toward her cottage, she realized that the silence no longer frightened her. It sang now softly, endlessly, a lullaby from a world that had taken and given back in equal measure. The sea had its peace, and she had hers. That night, as she extinguished the candle by her window, she looked once more toward the horizon and whispered, "Thank you." And far away, carried on the faintest whisper of wind, the ocean answered. Not in words, but in the soft, eternal language she had finally learned to understand. A promise, simple and sacred. Light always returns to the sea. As the flame died and darkness settled around her, the waves beyond the horizon shimmered once more, not in warning, not in hunger, but in remembrance. The world turned, the tide breathed, the story rested. And the woman who once chased treasure finally found something far rarer. Peace. The rain arrived softly that night, not the violent kind that had once carried ruin, but a gentle, steady rhythm that seemed to bless the land it touched. Elena Marlowe sat beside her window, watching droplets race down the glass, the faint reflection of her candlelight flickering between them. The world outside her little cottage was quiet, wrapped in that tender stillness, that only comes when everything that needed to happen has already happened. On the table before her lay the first edition of her memoir, The Weight of Gold. The pages had yellowed slightly from sea air, but the spine still creaked when opened, and the words inside still carried the pulse of the ocean. She ran her hand across the cover, tracing her own name. It didn't feel like pride, more like farewell. In the months since its release, her life had become unexpectedly full again. University students wrote essays about her moral reflections. Documentaries quoted her voice, and somewhere out there, the story of the sunken spa, once a secret guarded by the sea, had become a lesson whispered to those who chased the wrong kind of light. And yet, the attention didn't touch her. She lived simply, far from fame, choosing solitude over spectacle. The truth was, she'd stopped chasing immortality the day she nearly drowned trying to find it. Now, all she wanted was peace. She turned the book open to the dedication page. There were only 3 words written there, for the sea. Lightning flickered faintly in the distance, though no thunder followed. It wasn't a storm, just the world remembering what storms once sounded like. Elena smiled. You always remember, don't you? She rose, walking to the window. Outside the night was velvet, dark, broken only by the faint glow of moonlight over the distant horizon. The ocean shimmered faintly even from here, a living mirror that refused to fade. She leaned against the sill, listening, and then, faintly, so faintly she almost thought she imagined it, she heard it, the hum, not the dangerous one, not the lure of power or possession, but a softer echo like a heartbeat slowed to peace. She closed her eyes and let it surround her, not with fear but gratitude. It wasn't calling her this time, it was thanking her. Outside, the rain thickened. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of salt despite the miles between her and the shore. For a moment, she could almost see it, the waves rising and falling, the ruins far below resting undisturbed, coral reclaiming marble, fish moving through what was once gold. The Solara chamber had become a reef now, a living monument to the sea's patience. Nature had done what man never could. It had turned greed into beauty, and that, she thought, was the true redemption. The candle beside her sputtered, flame wavering. She cupped her hand gently around it, not to keep it alive, but to feel its warmth, that same warmth that had frightened her once. It was no longer the relic's heat, it was her own. She whispered, "I forgive you." Maybe she was speaking to the ocean. Maybe to herself. Maybe both. The candle steadied. The wind quieted. Then she reached for her notebook, not the old one from her dives, but a clean, new journal bound in plain linen. On the first page, she wrote a single line, "The sea keeps what we cannot carry." She paused, listening again to the rain. Each drop on the roof sounded like a heartbeat, gentle, unhurried, infinite. The clock on her mantel ticked softly, grounding her in the present. She added another line, "And sometimes it gives it back as light." Closing the notebook, she smiled. That was enough. There was no more to say. When morning came, the air was crisp and bright. The rain had passed, leaving the earth shining and clean. Elena walked barefoot into the small garden behind her cottage, dew sparkling on the grass, mist curling low over the hills. She carried a small brass compass in her hand, the one she'd salvaged long ago from the Solara ruins. It had stopped working years before, its needle fixed forever toward the west, toward the sea. She knelt and buried it beneath a cluster of white wildflowers. "You've done enough traveling," she whispered. Rest. As she rose, sunlight broke through the mist, catching the tiny droplets on her hair, turning them momentarily golden. She tilted her face toward the light, eyes closed. In that moment, she felt everything at once, the storms, the silence, the terror, the awe. The weight of gold that had once threatened to drown her had become something softer now, not burden, not curse, memory, legacy. By the time the sun reached its peak, she had finished packing the small rucksack that held her few belongings, her journal, a pen, and the old photograph of the Solara resort before the storm. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to move again. Not to chase but to wander, to live. At the cottage door she stopped and looked back one last time. The sea glittered faintly in the distance, calm and infinite. Elena smiled, whispering, "Keep your secrets." Then she turned and walked down the path, her figure small against the expanse of the awakening world. The wind stirred gently through the grass, carrying the faintest trace of her voice toward the coast. And as it reached the water, the waves rose and fell once soft, deliberate as though answering her farewell. Beneath the calm surface, where the Solara chamber slept beneath coral and time, the faintest shimmer pulsed once and faded. Not a warning, not a curse, a heartbeat. The sea remembered her not as a trespasser, but as one of its own. As twilight fell, the ocean reflected the first stars of evening. Each spark of starlight rippled across the waves like fragments of gold, not greed's promise, but grace's reminder. The story of the drowned resort had become myth, now retold in hushed tones, written in books, passed down through divers' songs and sailors' tales. But none knew the truth, not the way she did. The truth was simpler. The ocean was never cursed. It was only protecting what it loved, and in giving it back, Elena Marlowe had given herself back, too. That night, somewhere far from the shore, a fisherman claimed he saw light flicker beneath the waves, soft, rhythmic, the pulse of something vast and gentle. He said it looked like sunlight trying to rise from the bottom of the sea. Maybe it was just reflection, or maybe the ocean was smiling. Either way, the world moved on, and the sea kept its silence. But if you stand on that coast at dawn, when the wind is still and the light turns the horizon to gold, you might hear it faint, eternal, forgiving. The gold sleeps, but the light remains, and in that whisper, the legend of the sunken spa ends not with a scream or a storm, but with peace. Because some stories don't fade, they simply return home, years past, seasons blurred, one tide folding into another, until even the shoreline forgot the shape of her footprints. The world had changed in small, quiet ways. New resorts rose along distant coasts, glass and chrome reflections of the same hunger that had once buried the Solara chamber. But where the Maravilla ruins once stood, no one built again. The land refused it. The soil there shifted strangely, the foundation cracked by unseen rhythms. Locals called it the sleeping shore. Fishermen avoided the waters, and at night, when the moon sank low, the waves glowed faintly gold before fading back into black. Some said it was algae, others superstition, but the old divers, the ones who remembered Elena Marlowe's name, knew better. They said the sea still remembered her, and they were right. Far inland, in a quiet town framed by wind, bent pines and low stone fences, Elena lived a life so small it could fit inside a whisper. Her cottage had aged gracefully, ivy curling up its walls, wildflowers blooming along the path she rarely swept. She was older now, her hair streaked with silver, her hands steady despite the years. Each morning she still rose before dawn. She would boil tea, open the windows, and let the early light spill into her study, the same light she once chased beneath the ocean. It always came in golden. Her books lined every shelf now, translations, essays, photographs she never meant to take, but had taken all the same. The Weight of Gold had long since become a classic. People wrote about her like she was gone. She smiled at that, sometimes the irony of being called a legend while still paying for firewood, but she didn't correct them. Legends she'd learned were only truths that had learned patience. On her desk sat a letter unopened. Its seal bore the insignia of the Maritime Institute of Europe, the same organization that had once dismissed her work as romantic nonsense. Now, Decades later, they wanted her to return, to lecture, to tell the next generation about ethics in exploration. She had read the first line weeks ago, then folded it shut again. There were no ethics in exploration, only choices and the weight they left behind. That morning she sat at her desk, pen in hand, the letter open once more. The sea breeze found her even here, faint but unmistakable. It brushed across the paper like breath. Her reply was brief. The sea teaches what no classroom can. She sealed it and set it aside. Outside, the light shifted soft and gold again, almost too familiar. She turned toward the window, heart tightening. The air smelled of salt. It had been years since she'd gone near the coast, yet that scent had never truly left her. On impulse, she reached for her old compass, the one she'd buried long ago in her garden. But this one wasn't the same. This one she'd found weeks earlier, tucked inside a crate of old belongings sent by a journalist who'd interviewed her once. Its face was cracked, the glass fogged, and its needle, though rusted, trembled faintly toward the west. She held it in her palm, feeling its weight. "You again," she whispered, still pointing home. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. The wind had changed. It carried with it the faint sound of water, not waves, exactly, but something deeper, rhythmic. It wasn't calling. It was inviting. She lit her candle, the same ritual she'd kept every night for years. The flame steadied quickly, burning tall and clean. Its glow reflected in the compass face, a single trembling line pointing toward the coast. Something stirred in her chest, not dread, not longing. Recognition. The tide, it seemed, had turned again. By dawn, she had packed a small satchel notebook, flask, and the compass, and left her cottage door unlocked. The world was quiet as she walked down the winding dirt path, the forest still heavy with dew. The journey back to the coast took most of the day. Each step felt like retracing a dream, not a return, but a reflection of one. The closer she got, the more the air thickened with memory. When she reached the cliffs, she stopped. The view below stole her breath. The Maravilla shoreline lay open and untouched, exactly as it had been the day she left it. The ruins were gone, reclaimed completely. Only smooth stones and gentle dunes remained, glinting faintly in the afternoon sun. And yet beneath the tide something shimmered, a slow, pulsing glow that rose and fell with the rhythm of the waves. It was faint, like a heartbeat heard through layers of sleep. Elena sank to her knees, tears stinging her eyes. "You kept it," she whispered. The ocean's silence was answer enough. For a long while she stayed there, listening, her hand resting over her chest. The hum she'd once feared, the one that had haunted her dreams, was gone. But something new had replaced it, a quieter harmony, echoing not from the sea, but from within her. She realized then that she hadn't come back to find something. She had come back to give something. From her satchel, she drew a small vial glass, sealed with wax, filled with sand. Not gold, not relic dust, just earth. Soil from her garden, rich and living. She walked down to the water's edge, the surf cool around her ankles, and uncorked it. The sand slipped into the tide, dissolving instantly. Her voice trembled. "Something from my world for yours." The sea accepted it with a soft pull, a sigh that was almost human. For a moment the horizon flickered, not gold this time, but white like morning light reflected off endless water. Elena smiled, tears mixing with salt spray. "I missed you too." The wind rose behind her, carrying her words away. She closed her eyes, letting the air fill her lungs, and for the first time in decades she felt weightless, not as though she belonged to the earth, but as though the sea had finally forgiven her for ever trying to claim it. When she opened her eyes, she thought she saw a shape move far below the faint silhouette of the Solara chamber, now overgrown, sleeping. Around it shimmered the slow dance of fish and coral, life reborn from what once was ruin. The chamber wasn't a tomb anymore, it was a cradle. The ocean had learned to turn memory into mercy. Elena stood in the shallows as the tide rose around her, the water reaching her knees, then her waist. She didn't fight it, the sea wasn't taking her this time, it was holding her, and for a moment brief and infinite she could feel Ronan there too, not as a ghost but as presence, the light between them, soft and familiar. His voice came faintly through the wind, "You did it." Elena's breath broke into a smile. "No," she whispered, "we did." The waves swirled gently, lifting her hair, wrapping around her like silk. She could feel the warmth spreading through her chest again, not possession, not power, just peace. As she stepped back onto the sand, the light beneath the surface dimmed once more. The ocean exhaled. The tide had returned not to reclaim her, but to remind her that some stories never end. They just come home in softer waves. And as the wind carried the scent of salt and memory inland, the sun broke through the clouds, turning the entire horizon to gold once more. But this time, it wasn't greed's reflection. It was gratitude. The light lingered longer than it should have. It stretched across the water, soft and unbroken. Like a promise, the sun was unwilling to withdraw. The tide shimmered in gold and white, the same colors that once spelled destruction, yet now they felt like peace. A full circle drawn by the ocean itself. Elena Marlowe stood at the edge of that glowing water until the horizon blurred into dusk. The waves brushed her ankles, gentle, rhythmic, each one arriving with the sound of breath. The sea no longer whispered warnings, it simply was. In its calm, she could feel everything that had ever been, not as ghosts or echoes, but as memory woven into motion. The Solara chamber, once a prison of greed, now lay silent beneath her feet, filled not with gold but with coral gardens. Fish darted through the arches that once held vault doors. Seaweed flowed where marble mosaics had cracked. The ocean had written its own ending, one of life. Elena closed her eyes and listened. Beneath the hush of the waves, there was something deeper, not a hum, not a voice, but a steady rhythm. Her own pulse, the sea's, the same. A breeze moved over the water, lifting her hair. For a heartbeat, she thought she smelled him, Ronan, the faint trace of salt and cedar and camera oil that had always clung to him. She smiled, still watching. The wind answered with a soft sigh through the reeds. "Good," she whispered, "keep an eye on it." Her gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the sky melted into the sea. Somewhere beyond that invisible line lay every story the ocean had ever kept, every ship, every secret, every soul that had surrendered to its depths. For centuries people had tried to conquer it, map it, name it, but she knew better now. The sea wasn't something to be known. It was something to be remembered, and remembering was enough. She bent down, scooped a handful of seawater into her palm, and watched the sunlight flicker across it. For a brief second, she saw it again, faint, almost imperceptible, tiny flecks of gold suspended within. Not a curse, not even a trace of the relic, but a spark. The same kind found in the eyes of those who have seen too much and still choose to love the world anyway. She released it slowly, letting the water slip between her fingers. "Thank you," she murmured. The tide answered by rising once, touching the hem of her coat before retreating again. Behind her, the cliffs glowed with the last light of day. Shadows lengthened, but they were soft, not the kind that hid things, but the kind that allowed the world to rest. Elena began her walk along the shore. The sand was cool beneath her feet, the wind calm, the surf whispering in rhythm with her heartbeat. Each step left a print that the waves gently erased behind her, not out of cruelty, but out of kindness. The sea had learned to forget softly. As night descended, the horizon turned to silver. Stars began to shimmer across the sky, their reflections rippling on the water's surface. For a moment it looked as if the heavens themselves had fallen into the ocean, the line between sky and sea gone entirely. Elena stopped and looked up. The first star, low and bright, mirrored perfectly in the tide. She whispered, "You've always been there, haven't you?" And though no voice answered, the star pulsed once, faintly, as if in acknowledgment. She sat down on the sand, drawing her knees to her chest. The surf rolled closer, wrapping her in its hush. It felt less like being near the sea and more like being within it, the world breathing through her instead of around her. She thought of everything she had seen: the gold, the ruins, the storm, the impossible light beneath the water. She thought of Solara, of Ronan, of all the lives consumed by the hunger to possess what should have only been witnessed. And she realized something she had never said aloud. The sea had never been the villain. Humanity's reflection was greed, fear, desire. The same currents that pulled men into deep water still flowed through every era. But maybe, just maybe, her story had changed the tide even a little. Her memoir, her words, her truth, they had reached beyond the coast. They had become a warning, yes, but also a prayer, that we remember beauty without needing to own it. And as she sat there under the endless sky, she understood that this was what the sea had wanted all along: not silence, not secrecy, but understanding, to be known not as gold, but as grace. A new wind stirred, cool and fragrant. It carried with it the scent of coming rain, the soft kind that nourished, not destroyed. The moon climbed higher, bathing the shore in silver light. Elena stood. The years fell away in that glow, and for a fleeting second, she felt young again, barefoot, fearless, standing before the ruins that started it all. Only this time there was no storm, no fear, no hunger, only calm. She took one last look at the ocean, her old adversary, her teacher, her mirror, and then she whispered, "We're even now." The water shimmered, faint ripples spreading outward, and for the briefest moment she thought she saw it, a single beam of light breaking through the depths, rising toward the surface. Then it vanished. The tide withdrew, the night settled, the sea went still again. Elena turned and began the long walk back toward the path that led inland. Each step took her farther from the shore, yet somehow closer to it too, because she knew now that she didn't need to be near the water to hear its voice. It lived inside her. As she reached the edge of the dunes, she looked back one final time. The horizon glowed faintly, not in fire or stormlight, but in quiet luminescence. And there, beneath the starlit surface, the ocean whispered the words she'd once heard in her dreams. The gold sleeps. The sea remembers. The light remains. Elena smiled, the corners of her eyes wet, her breath trembling with joy rather than grief. She turned toward the hills where dawn was beginning to break and walked into the rising light, slow, deliberate, at peace. Behind her, the ocean continued its endless rhythm, rise and fall. Inhale and exhale, eternal as memory, patient as time. And as the first rays of morning struck the horizon, the sea lit up one last time, golden and bright, before melting back into blue. The cycle was complete. The tide had returned, and so had she. The legend of the sunken spa ended there, not in gold or ruin, but in the quiet heartbeat of two worlds finally at peace with each other. And, as the waves whispered along the sleeping shore, carrying fragments of light across the sand, the ocean said what it had always meant to say. Some treasures are never meant to be found, only felt. The world turned, the tide breathed, and the sea, eternal and forgiving, closed its story with grace. The gold slept forever, the light remained.